The steel doors of the containment chamber slid shut with a deafening hiss. Dr. Grace Winters took a step back, her eyes locked on the screen in front of her. Subject 12, Marcus Vaughn, was calm, for now. His broad, muscular frame leaned against the white walls of the sterile chamber, eyes glinting with uncertainty. The serum, a perfect concoction of neurochemical enhancers, had been tested on animals with flawless results. But this was different. Marcus wasn't just another subject. He was the key to proving her theory, or the harbinger of disaster. Everything's in place? Grace's voice was steady, though her hands were slightly trembling as she checked the display again. Her assistant, Dr. Eve Larson, looked up from the control panel. Yes, Dr. Winters. All readings are within normal parameters. The serum's effects are likely to take hold in the next 15 minutes. Grace nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. The success of the serum could push her career into the stratosphere. It would change everything, the world would never be the same. But the risks were monumental. She glanced at Marcus through the reinforced glass. His strong jaw was set, his eyes unfocused, as if he were preparing himself for something bigger than he had anticipated. "How are you feeling, Marcus?" Grace asked through the intercom. Marcus' voice echoed back, low and gravelly. "Nervous, but ready. Let's get this over with." Her breath caught. He didn't look ready. But it wasn't her place to doubt him now. The decision had already been made. Initiating procedure, Grace said to Eve, her hand steady despite the internal chaos. "Begin infusion." With a soft click, the syringe on the system's track moved forward, inserting the syringe into the chamber's force system. The serum slowly entered Marcus' bloodstream. A slight twitch ran through his body, his expression blank. Grace held her breath, watching the data as it streamed across her screen. It was working. It had to be. 10 minutes passed. Marcus remained still, almost too still. Eve turned to Grace. "Do you think it's working?" "He's not showing any signs of." Her words were cut off by a sharp gasp from Marcus. His body jerked, his muscles locking up in a violent spasm. The intercom crackled with his strained voice. "Something's wrong." Grace's stomach dropped. "Marcus," she shouted, rushing to the intercom. "What's happening?" His face contorted in pain, his hands clawing at his chest. "I can feel my mind. It's racing. It's tearing me apart." The display on Grace's screen flickered as the monitoring systems began to show erratic data. The serum was amplifying neural activity, far more than intended. Marcus' heart rate spiked dangerously. This wasn't just cognitive enhancement. It was a nightmare taking form. "Eve, we need to stabilize him. Now." Grace's voice cracked. She slapped at the controls in a panic. "I'm trying, Dr. Winters. The system's overriding everything." His neural patterns are. Eve's words were interrupted by a loud crash. Grace spun to face the glass. Marcus was no longer standing still. He slammed into the chamber's walls with terrifying force, his fists pummeling the reinforced glass. His eyes were wild now, frantic and unfocused. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his breath came in ragged gasps. You made me." His voice was guttural, like something primal was breaking through. "What the hell is happening?" Eve's voice was tight with fear. This wasn't part of the plan. Grace's mind raced, her pulse quickening. She had tested everything. They had simulated the serum's effects in a dozen different ways, but this was something entirely different. The serum had amplified not just cognitive function, but something far darker. "I don't know," Grace whispered, her hands shaking as she tried to regain control of the data. Something in the formula, it must have triggered an overload. His mind, his emotions, they're all out of sync. "We need to shut it down. Now." Eve ran to the emergency shutdown panel, but the screens continued to flash warnings, each more dire than the last. Marcus was no longer just a subject. He was something else. something terrifying. The serum had unleashed a force beyond their understanding. With a deep, resigned breath, Grace made a decision. Open the door. Eve's eyes widened. Are you insane? We can't, he's. Open it, Eve, Grace commanded, her voice firm. We've already crossed the line. There's no turning back. For a moment, Eve hesitated. But then, she reached for the override button. The door opened with a low hiss, and Grace stepped into the chamber, her heart hammering in her chest. Marcus was still pounding at the walls, his breath coming in erratic bursts. But when he saw Grace, his eyes locked onto hers. Grace, what did you do to me? His voice was no longer a question, it was a demand, raw and powerful. Grace swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for this to happen. But now, we have to figure out what to do with it. The world outside the lab would soon find out what happened when humanity tampered too much with the unknown. And Grace Winters knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The lab was dead silent, save for the distant hum of the ventilation system. Grace stood still, her hands trembling as she watched Marcus. The once strong, confident man now slumped against the chamber wall, his breath shallow but rapid. The pulse of the serum had consumed him, but it hadn't stopped there. The transformation was more profound than anyone had anticipated. His eyes flicked toward her, the raw emotion in them like a physical blow. What did you do to me? He asked again, but this time his voice was quieter, fissures of fear and anger twisting it. Grace opened her mouth, but words stuck in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. She had always been driven by the pursuit of discovery, by the rush of potential greatness. But now, standing in front of Marcus, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming reality. She had created something far beyond her control. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice almost inaudible. The serum was supposed to enhance your cognitive functions, nothing more. But it amplified something inside you. Something deep. Marcus slowly straightened up, his eyes narrowing. His movements were jerky, like a puppet whose strings were too tight. Amplified? What does that even mean? His hands clenched into fists, his body trembling with restrained power. Do you have any idea what I'm feeling right now? The world is crawling inside my head. It's suffocating me. Grace swallowed hard, her own frustration building. I know this isn't what you signed up for, she said quickly. But we can fix it. We just need time to adjust the serum. I'll find a way. You think time is going to fix this? Marcus' laugh was bitter, like broken glass. You've given me a curse, Grace. My mind is racing 1,000 miles per second. I can't shut it off, I can't focus. It's too much. You're not the only one who's stuck now. His words hit her like a slap, and Grace flinched. It wasn't the physical pain that got to her, it was the truth. In all her planning, and all her hope for success, she had never accounted for this level of failure. It was too big, too uncontrollable. The lab's door slid open suddenly, and Eve stepped inside. Her eyes immediately went to Marcus, then to Grace, sensing the tension. Dr. Winters, she began cautiously, her voice strained, the lab systems are starting to malfunction. We're getting erratic feedback from the serum's data. His vitals are spiking again. We need to shut it down, Eve, Grace snapped, cutting her off. This was supposed to be a controlled experiment, not an avalanche of destruction. I'll fix this. Just give me some time. Eve hesitated but nodded, stepping back toward the control panel. Grace watched her, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Could she fix this? Could she reverse what she had unleashed on Marcus? Grace, Marcus said suddenly, his voice low but firm. I don't want to be your experiment anymore. This thing, he gestured at his own head, at the frantic energy that was consuming him. It's already changing me. I can feel it. I can see things, patterns, connections, things I've never seen before. But I can't control it. I don't want to be a part of your experiment anymore. Grace's stomach clenched. I'm not going to let you become a casualty of my work, Marcus. Please, just trust me. Let me help you. Marcus' eyes were wild, filled with a fierce intensity she hadn't seen before. He took a step toward her, his body now emanating an unsettling power. Help me? You've already crossed the line. You've already done the impossible. But at what cost, Grace? At what cost? His words reverberated in the air, sending a ripple of tension through the room. Eve stood silently, her eyes flicking between them, unsure of what to do. Marcus closed the distance between them in a flash, his movements too fast for the eye to track. He gripped the edge of a nearby table, his hands shaking with the force of the serum's effects. Do you even realize what you've unleashed? You've given me the ability to. Before he could finish, the lights in the lab flickered. The emergency alarms blared to life, red flashing across the walls. Grace's heart raced as she turned to the control panel. What's happening now? She demanded. Eve's fingers flew across the keyboard. It's the serum, she said, her voice tinged with panic. It's messing with the lab systems. The feedback loop is creating a feedback network across the entire facility. Marcus' gaze shifted to the flashing red lights. His jaw tightened. It's getting worse. Whatever you did, Grace, it's bigger than we imagined. He wasn't wrong. Grace felt it too. The shift in the air was palpable, the tension in the room thick with something darker than fear. Marcus wasn't just experiencing side effects. He was becoming something else entirely, something that had the power to change everything. Suddenly, Marcus' eyes snapped to hers, a sudden clarity in them. You wanted to make the world better, he said quietly. But you've made me a weapon. And now, we have to decide what to do with it. The weight of his words hung in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The lab felt colder now, like a distant memory of a time when everything made sense. Grace stood beside the terminal, fingers frozen over the keyboard as the screens flickered with chaotic data. Eve was scanning the diagnostics at a pace that suggested she was trying to outrun her own thoughts. The hum of the ventilation system, once a comforting background noise, now seemed to press in, amplifying the silence. Marcus wasn't in the same corner anymore. His presence was now a looming force in the room, unsettling in its stillness. His eyes were fixed on Grace, an unreadable intensity radiating from them. She knew he was no longer the same person who had volunteered for her experiment. The serum had done something to him, something that both terrified and fascinated her. I'm not your experiment anymore, Marcus said, his voice low but firm. The words sliced through the tension in the room like a blade. Grace's breath hitched, but she managed to turn toward him, her heart heavy with guilt. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered. I thought I could control it. I thought I could help you. Marcus' eyes flickered, the raw emotion from earlier replaced with something colder. Help me? You've unleashed something inside me that I can't contain. And now I'm a danger to you. To everyone. Grace swallowed hard. You're not a danger, Marcus. You're just, she cut herself off, unsure how to finish the sentence. There was no way to explain the enormity of what had happened. You're just different. A hollow laugh escaped Marcus, and he took a step forward. The room seemed to close in around them, the distance between them shrinking with every second. Different? He shook his head. No, Grace. I'm not just different. I'm something else entirely. I can see the world in ways I never could before. I understand things that don't even make sense. The serum didn't just make me smarter. It made me limitless. The weight of his words pressed down on Grace, suffocating her. She had only intended to enhance his mind, to give him the cognitive abilities that would make him extraordinary. But now, he was something more. Something beyond her comprehension. And she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Marcus was becoming, it was out of her control. Eve looked up from the terminal, her face pale. The systems are failing faster now. It's like the serum is feeding back into everything, the lab, the city grid, the power network. If we don't contain it soon, we won't be able to stop the cascade. We'll lose everything. Grace turned to her, panic rising in her chest. What are you saying? We have to stop Marcus? We can't do that, Eve's gaze was unwavering. I'm saying that we need to contain the fallout. This isn't just about you and Marcus anymore, Grace. This is bigger. If the serum's influence spreads beyond this facility, it could cause a global disruption. Marcus' eyes flickered, a dangerous glint in them. What are you implying? That I'm some kind of threat to the world? His voice was a mix of disbelief and fury. Grace stepped forward, trying to calm him. Marcus, we're not saying that, she said, her voice strained. We just need to find a way to fix this, to control what's happening. But Marcus was already moving, his body seeming to hum with energy. He reached out and swiped a row of monitors off the workbench, sending them crashing to the floor. The sound of the shattering glass echoed through the lab like a death knell. I'm not your experiment, Grace, he repeated, his voice colder now, harder. And I'm not your prisoner. You don't control me. A chill ran down Grace's spine as she realized how true that was. She had created something far beyond her abilities to control. The serum, meant to be a tool for human advancement, had instead become a catalyst for destruction. And Marcus, he was the first step in something much larger, much more dangerous. We can still fix this, Grace said, her voice faltering. I know we can. Marcus stopped moving, his gaze piercing. Fix it? There's nothing to fix, Grace. What I am now, what this serum has made me, it's irreversible. And if you try to stop me, you'll regret it. The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She had spent her entire career chasing the promise of progress, of unlocking the potential hidden within humanity. But she had never imagined the consequences would be so dire. Eve, sensing the tension, stepped forward cautiously. We need a plan. This isn't something we can solve by just pushing buttons on a console. Grace nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had to stop Marcus before the ripple effect reached beyond the lab. But how? He was no longer the man who had signed up for an enhancement experiment. He was something entirely different now. Something powerful, unpredictable. I'm not running from this, Marcus said, his voice rising in intensity. I will find a way to make this work for me. And if you try to stop me, I will make you understand what true power feels like. The lab's lights flickered once again. The hum of the air conditioning had turned into a low growl, vibrating the walls. A sense of impending chaos hovered in the air, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Grace took a step back, the weight of her decision bearing down on her. She had created this monster. And now, the world would have to reckon with what she had done. The question wasn't whether she could stop Marcus. The real question was, did she even want to? The lab was silent now, the kind of silence that settled heavy on the chest, like the calm before a storm. Grace stood motionless in front of the shattered monitors, the soft buzz of the damaged equipment her only company. She didn't know what she had expected when Marcus's transformation began, but this wasn't it. She hadn't anticipated that the very thing she had created to help him would become the force that drove him away from everything he once was. Do you think you can stop me, Grace? Marcus's voice cut through the stillness, chilling her to the bone. His figure loomed in the doorway, the dim light casting a sharp shadow across his face, highlighting the cold edge in his eyes. You thought I was just a test subject. You thought I was nothing more than a lab experiment. But I'm more now. And you're too late to control it. Grace's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to face him. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but she held her ground. She couldn't show weakness, not now. I didn't want this, Marcus, she said, her voice low but steady. I wanted to help you, to make you better. But you're not yourself anymore. This power, it's changing you. Marcus took a step forward, his movements unnaturally smooth, like he was gliding across the floor. I'm becoming who I was always meant to be, he said, each word dripping with certainty. You gave me the means to unlock my potential. And now I'm going to use it. Grace's breath hitched, fear creeping up her spine. She had seen the way he looked at the world now, the way his mind seemed to process everything differently. The serum had opened doors that once closed would never be shut again. Marcus, listen to me, she said urgently, trying to reach him. You're becoming something else. Something dangerous. If we don't stop this now, the serum's influence will spread. It won't just be you, it'll be everyone. For a brief moment, Marcus's expression faltered, a flicker of something, doubt, maybe, passing through his eyes. But then, like a storm breaking over a calm sea, that hesitation was gone. His gaze hardened, and the air around him seemed to hum with raw energy. I'm already too far gone for you to fix. And I don't want to be fixed. Grace's pulse quickened. He was right, there was no going back. The change had already begun, and the more he embraced it, the less human he seemed to become. It was as if the very essence of his identity was slipping through her fingers like sand. What happens now, Marcus? Eve's voice broke through the tension, and Grace turned to find her standing near the main console, her face pale but resolute. We can't keep pretending this is under control. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the terminal, his eyes flicking over the screens as if calculating something far beyond the scope of the technology. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy, before he finally spoke. Now, you make your choice, he said, his voice a low growl. You either help me take what's mine, or you stand in my way. If you choose the latter, I'll make you regret it. A cold shiver ran through Grace. This wasn't the Marcus she had known, the kind, thoughtful man who had joined her experiment with a sense of hope and trust. This new version, this thing, was far more dangerous than she had anticipated. Eve stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with resolve. I won't let you destroy everything, she said, her voice sharp. This power you're embracing, it's not just yours to control. It's already bleeding into the system, and if you push it any further, you won't just have to deal with us, you'll be dealing with the entire world. The mention of the global consequences seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. For a brief moment, his eyes widened with something almost like fear. But then that flicker was gone, replaced by a hard, unyielding stare. You think you can stop me, he repeated, his tone mocking. You can't even understand the scope of what I've become. Grace's mind raced. Eve was right, this was spiraling beyond their control. She had no idea how to stop Marcus now, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that stopping him might not even be the right course of action. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the ventilation system groaning, a low, ominous rumble that shook the lab. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, the whole room seemed to tremble. Marcus smiled, a cold, predatory grin that sent a chill down Grace's spine. It's too late, he said. The serum is already starting to spread. You can't stop what's coming. Grace's mind raced. The serum had always been designed to enhance human potential, to make them stronger, faster, more intelligent. But this was a whole new level. If Marcus's power was spreading like a virus, it would only be a matter of time before the world felt its effects. We have to stop it, Grace whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We have to find a way. But Marcus was already walking away, his steps confident, assured. You'll figure it out soon enough, he said over his shoulder, his voice dripping with finality. But it will be too late for you to change anything. As the doors to the lab hissed open and Marcus disappeared into the darkened hallway, Grace and Eve stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on them like an avalanche. The world was no longer in their hands.